I'm Margaret Montgomery, and I am the Global Sustainable Practice Leader for NBBJ. I'm here from Seattle today, and I do have the privilege of moderating this roundtable. We've been looking at all of the various courses of facades today, and we're going to end this up with talking about materials. And I've been really encouraged and excited in this sort of area of just the pure materials lately, because we now have a kind of a taxonomy in the industry that we really haven't had as a common language before when thinking about the performance of materials as far as sort of the sustainability aspects. And we've got 5 categories of performance, which are climate health, human health, social health and equity, ecosystem health, and circularity. And we're going to hit 2 or 3 of those today, which I think is going to be a great conversation. We have 4 great panelists here, and once I get done with these introductions, I'm going to go sit in the kids' chair at the end. So we'll just have a conversation from there. We have Lisa Ramick, who is from Eckersley O'Callaghan, and she is a director there, and she's also involved in their R&D program. And we have, actually right here, we have Patrick Elmore, who's the president of business development for Infinite Recycled Technologies, and he's about as deep into glass recycling as I think anyone can get. So he's super passionate about it, and I'm looking forward to that. And we have Sophie Pennetier, founder of Denia, and she is also crossing, actually we have some academic connections here too. So she's crossing between industry and academia as well. And then we have Kathleen Hetrick from Borough Happold, and she is a little bit more on the holistic side of this panel. So we kind of have a whole spectrum of really interesting viewpoints to talk about materiality and circularity and the embodied carbon and how all of this works into facades, and what about the supply chain. Anyway, there's lots of good questions. So from here on in, I'm going to let them take it away, and we have a few slides from each person, and then we're just going to have a conversation. And I'm going to bring you this.
Hey y'all. Ooh, it's wild. Last panel of the day, dessert course. We're going to keep things spicy dessert. I don't know how that will go, but here we go. So yeah, like Margaret said, I'm here to kind of provide a more holistic, kind of scene setting for us on circularity. I think someone was saying, you hear circularity as a buzzword a lot, at conferences like this or in your practices. And actually, it's not a buzzword. It's something that we can bring to all of our projects right now. Whether that's you're taking down a building and you can do deconstruction, it's specifying the sustainable products like we just heard from Boston Terracotta and YKK and everybody, that thinking about it from the products process is also really important. The supply chain, even how we get our materials to site, and just starting to integrate circularity more and more into our projects is really incredibly important. And, I don't know about you guys, but living in LA, this has been a pretty tough year. January 2025, almost a year ago, we had the fires, and thinking about how circularity plays into that story. I'm also from Texas, and my parents live right next to Kerrville, where the floods were in the summer. And that community is also thinking about how do you rebuild. So communities all across America are grappling with this. And it doesn't take a natural disaster, a climate disaster, for circularity and health to come into play. We can't have circular supply chains with toxic plastics, toxic chemicals. We really need to think about if your clients don't want to hear the carbon story, everybody wants to hear the health story. They want to hear about how we're, bringing jobs back to America, how we're addressing the affordability crisis, how higher ed, having their budget slashed, how can they continue to build housing with the assets they have instead of building new? How can they reimagine their campuses? How can we reimagine our office buildings? These are all problems and solutions that circularity brings to the table that we need to get on board with. And I would just say that, when we think about a circularity ecosystem, you have to do everything. It can't just be the buildings. This is one of these issues where circularity is not going to happen if we all stay in our lane and just focus on our buildings and our boundaries. We have to be working with our manufacturers to ask and develop more circular materials. we need to be bringing it out to every building that we're working on and starting to work with other buildings to do matchmaking. We need to be thinking about portfolios and how can we, store surplus materials? How can we think about the longevity of the finishes that we're working with? And, some great cities, counties, San Diego, Philadelphia, San Antonio, are working on this on a city level. So it's really about us here to be that final layer of the dessert, right? That industry change. That's where it needs to start happening. And I would just say that, again, it starts today. You don't need permission to ask a good question. Can we save this travertine before it goes thrown into the dump, right? Can we do a circularity audit that takes an hour to just go through the building you're about to demolish and see if there's anything worth saving? Can we talk about getting a quote for deconstruction rather than demolition? Can we hear how long it's going to take to do that? Can we think about doing adaptive reuse instead of a new build? There's been some in the newspaper, architectural newspaper. There's some amazing adaptive reuse projects that are super creative and super inspiring. This is what people want. We don't want shitty buildings anymore. We don't want to look at the same buildings that gentrify our cities. We want something different, and adaptive reuse can really do that. So I think as facade engineers, facades experts, it's a huge role to play, and it's getting to be, we've seen circularity really come for the finishes, structural engineering, and I think it's time for, facades engineers and consultants and architects as well. So that's just a quick overview to make it real. This is happening. So I'll turn it over to the next speaker, Sophie.
Wow. I know it's a hard act to follow. Wow, you move me each time. Starting with the numbers. So I used to steer sustainability design close. We actually have grocery here, and starting with the numbers, we quantified the carbon emissions with the end in mind of doing our EPDs, and realized that whether you have, in all the EPD of the product that we developed, aluminum and glass were the largest contributors. Transportation here in brown was anecdotal. And so when you do look into recycling those materials, you can actually tap into, reducing by a third or half carbon footprint. So we set on to take apart those units. And you can see here Lisa in the background, winking as I'm destroying my shoulder, popping up this IGU out of its unit, as we set off to look into the circularity of the products that we had with Enclose, and looked into all this byproduct that we had here, namely some glass, quite contaminated. But fast forward, I've spun off my own startup. And my first contract was actually Lisa, my first customer, when she ordered awards for her visionary event that she had last year at Glass Tech. So we produced awards made out of end-of-life glass, and that she distributed to visionaries of this field. So we don't get awards yet, but we make them. And so first commission, our real grown-up commission projects is a chapel in Arkansas, for which we have produced panels also coming out of end-of-life glass that's fused together. And we'll still do more awards, a lead plaque for Walter P. Moore. Also look at the scaling. So we're looking into producing panels in excess of 8 feet. So that's the chapel I just mentioned earlier. That just won some AIA Design Awards 2 weeks ago. So we have bridges there at our stands. We are spanning bridges between academia and industry. And so I full-time side gig teach facade tectonics class. And so our students have been looking into the reuse of salvage lumber for the structure of a little pavilion, as well as, yes, you get it, car parts in the exploration of tectonics of metal facades for fire resistance, as well as clay tiles with a local partner, Arto, and hem cement on the other side, and bricks. So we have actually partnered with Givning Architects in retrieving some of the bricks of the sites of the homes relocated from anywhere in LA, this one in West Hollywood to Altadena. And so when you move a home, you can't move the chimney. So we've dug the trash. I mean, aren't we all trash people here? And cleaned the bricks on campus thanks to an equipment that is lent to us by Fraco and Brick Recycle that shaves off the mortar of the bricks for their own cleaning and reuse. And so these are a few of the examples we can talk about today. Let's say that. Thank you.
So because everything that we're doing here right now is reasonably experimental, I thought I would talk about a few project examples from Europe. I just got back from Europe and had learned over the last couple of days, what I thought was quite interesting, that we aren't actually becoming more circular globally. So globally, it seems like circularity is shrinking compared from 2018 to 2024, and even the EU is going down, despite the fact that we're always talking about how great Europe is. And then looking at facades in general, it seems like we put a lot of embodied carbon in up front, obviously, but we don't very well think about what is the service life of a facade, particularly here, and how much energy do we put in maintenance before its end of life. And there we see around 30 years we kind of we need new glass, and in between we replace some of the big gaskets, etc., and then really end of life hopefully after 60 years. What are the barriers to reuse? Why don't we reuse facades more? And it seems like a lot of these barriers are technical, which I think all of us here can really overcome, and cost is another one. But really, why don't we do that differently? So in this project, cost was a big one, but because it's in France and the UNESCO headquarters, they were okay at the time paying double the amount to redo this facade than it would have cost to make it new. So it's the UNESCO headquarters, beautiful building designed by Jean Prouvé, a unitized system designed in the 70s, and our team in Paris went and reused a lot of this facade. So they took it apart, took the aluminium framing, which was generally good, put a timber frame behind it to support it and stiffen it, take the glass, bring it back to Saint-Gobain. So they recycled all the glass, and in the end, it's a beautifully refurbished facade with which used with significantly less embodied carbon than it would have if it was made new. Another project in Paris, and why I'm talking about projects in Paris is because I think you need nice buildings to be able to reuse them. And as much as we do have a lot of buildings here, a lot of them aren't as nice. So that is where I think places like Paris, London, New York have an advantage, because they have beautiful buildings that are really worth conserving. So this one is quite interesting. Two opportunities here that have been conserved very well. One were these aluminium panels, cast aluminium panels, beautiful. No one would ever be able to afford them today anymore. So the team was really keen, just keeps going. The team was really keen to conserve them. So they took the panels off and integrated them into a new system. So that cast aluminium panel was completely conserved. The other thing was the double kind of box window piece of glass on the inside, and to make sure that that toughened piece of glass could be kept on the inside, there's a lot of testing that had to be done to understand what are the properties of that glass and to be able to reuse it. And I think this is really interesting, where we tend to just these days go and say we'll use material properties from the code and whatever. I think reusing material brings us back to a time where we would actually think about the engineering and the properties of the materials much more. And for me, coming from a background of doing lots of crazy glass stuff, I feel very comfortable in that. But I think for a lot more materials, we have to go back and really think about how do we test what real material properties are, and how do we then design with them. Southern Europe, this is a tower in Greece, in Athens, which was built 30 years ago, never used. It was clad, and then now it was supposed to be reclad so that it would actually be used. So we took the glass out, the aluminium out, made new shading fins on the outside of the building out of the aluminium so that it would become significantly more performative, and the glass was recycled into new glass. So 125 tons of glass going back into the float line. And that's the new facade. Very exciting. For me, first project in California where we're seriously doing some reuse. We've got external glazing, internal glazing, and we're quite ambitious with an owner in the Bay Area, where we're saying we don't want to go the typical route of taking flat glass out of a building and just downcycling it into insulation. We really want to bring it back into the building again. But our friends, the floaters, really don't want to take it back. If anybody from Vitro or Guardian is here, please take our glass. But because they don't want to at the moment, we're trying to take the glass, the timber is a different story, I'll not talk about that, and really trying to make something beautiful for the building out of it with a caster, John Lewis in Oakland, that we've worked with a lot before on different projects. These are examples of things we've done with them. And we're trying to melt this glass into something that is really beautiful material that we then have to test its properties to bring it back into a new building rather than just, downcycling it into insulation, which isn't a bad thing. And just to mention briefly, a lot of this has come out of this initiative called Circularity that I started with a colleague and friend called Linda Hildebrandt in Germany, where we've got a bunch of people globally, so he's part of it, that do research and work in circularity of glass and facades and exchange that knowledge. So we met for a big conference in Germany last year. We're going to have another one next year in October, and we're going to have this award again, and it's set in these different categories. So if anybody, even if you guys don't go to Germany, if anybody has products, processes, etc. developed that have to do with circularity in glass, please apply for the award. We really would like to honor your efforts.
Well, I didn't bring near as many slides as everybody else, so I'll make it short and easy. Patrick Elmer, I'm the president of Infinite Recycle Technologies. What we do at our company is we recycle all the hard-to-recycle glass. There's 100 people out there that can recycle the normal clean plate glass, so we try to keep it to the stuff that no one else is doing. We've designed our machine to delaminate architectural glass, as well as clean the IGs, and then recycle those back down to new glass. We can take a laminated IG, run it through our process, through our machine, give you clean enough cullet to go back into a flow plant. Now, flow plants nowadays around here, different over in the UK, but here they're very picky, so a lot of them don't like to take it. They're getting warmed up to it. We're working with them every day to the different flow plants around the US to accept it, but it's really picky for them. So the majority is going into a lot of other glass markets versus straight float plate glass again, but that's tomorrow's problem. I just brought a couple of slides for a couple of the projects we're doing. The majority of what Infinite does is all post-industrial. So all of your flow plants, all of your manufacturing plants, all of those going down the line to your installers, all have waste. So that's where the majority of ours comes from those fabricators and stuff like that. We have started about a year ago with a new project. Currently, as far as I know, we're still the only ones in the country doing it, which is part of being here today to expand and have more and more people do it. But retrofits, whether that's going to be a full facade, exterior, interior. New York started as, this was our very first pilot project. At One Bryant Park, this was with the Durst organization. They redid 2 floors of interior glass. It was glass partitions, glass doors, and then whole glass walls. So taking that out and then being able to recycle that and get that back into new markets again was a really big deal. It spiraled from just this one project to a year ago to it seems like every day we're doing another project around New York City where we're taking the facades off and getting that glass captured and recycled. The next one I did was, this happened to be a full exterior demo. So they tore the entire building down versus like just removing the glass. This happened to be a full demo. They went through ahead of time and took all the glass out, brought it down. This one they did, they brought it all down in elevators from the top floor down, stacked it up, then stuck it in some roll-offs. We picked up the roll-offs and brought them back to our facility, got that all recycled and sent back into new markets. So just to, kind of expand off of what New York City is doing, every day another project is done. The building codes change there, so many buildings, the glass has to be replaced, whether that's new thermal glass or bird friendly or whatever it may be for that building, it has to be changed out. So having so much of something that is so awesome that can be infinitely recycled to be able to go back into new markets again is a really good thing. So by expanding that out to new markets across the U.S., whether that's LA, Texas, Chicago, Minneapolis, we've done another one in Minneapolis, the world famous Mayo Clinic. We're in the middle of a big project for them right now. They're doing a full demo of one of their glass buildings to be able to grab all of that glass and get that recycled and sent back out is just a great way to capture it. But yeah, so that's just kind of what I wanted to talk about, was making sure that we expand this and grab this glass out of the post-consumer and get that taken care of as well.
This is great. You guys have amazing vision, and you all have something in mind, both for your own practice and then for the industry at large. And I would just love to hear, I guess you can either say for the industry or for your own practice. I don't, whichever place you want to take it. But I would just love to hear, what's your long-term vision for where you think this can go, and what's the next step from where you are now?
I can say that I think long term, our industry addresses the affordability, the housing crisis in our respective cities. I think circular economies and getting hyper local and getting back to the craftsmanship that has defined architecture for so long, we bring that back to our cities. That's the long term goal of circular economy, and we can build great jobs, local manufacturing back to this country. All of that can happen if we embrace circular economy thinking. And I think where the rest of the world is getting more digital and into AI, we can be the tangible things that bring communities together. That's the long-term vision. Short-term, it's things like this. It's getting people excited to feel like it's real. It's, these groups like Reclaim NYC or USGBC California Circularity Committee. It's folks that are super nerding out on glass to make things happen. Like, it takes a village, and it's just getting people excited about it.
I think the concept of materials, like material sourcing sovereignty, is something that starts to emerge and actually strikes chords with lots of people, with the idea that we have so much material that is available here at a time where there's fluctuations in cost of energy and international supply chains, massive delays, during the last and the next pandemic. And so I think the vision of having, sorry to say that, and plus French, but like our materials and our labor, our local jobs, this kind of thing, it has this kind of it's very tangible, and also the opportunity to maybe beat some lead times that we've seen in the industry as such. And so that's of course a very lofty goal, but that's a vision, and that's what we need.
I think it's interesting to think about how do we keep this economy of construction going, right? To Vinke's point earlier that theoretically we need to build, and building is a good thing. I feel like we now should think about how do we build with materials that we already have, and how do we design with materials that we already have, because we're incredibly bad at using something that has a specific format, because we've been becoming so used to that we can change the shape of everything to whatever we like, and we always start with a picture. And I feel like the challenge now should be, how do we get to a point where we have the ability to look at what we have and design something that is as good, as functional, as performative, but also as beautiful as something that we just designed from scratch.
So the question was, where do we see it going for for the future? Is that what? Okay.
Long term, short term.
Okay, so where I see the glass recycling going is just exploding. It seems like there's a lot more people every day picking it up. We're not the only ones out there. We started with being pretty much the only ones doing our exact niche, but more people are growing, and we're trying to help more companies do it. But I think my goal and what I think the future is going to be in the next 5-10 years is creating so much more education, letting the awareness know that this is not just one type of glass that can be recycled. It's not just your clean plate glass that came off the line wrong. This can be mirrors out of bathrooms. This can be IGs, LGs, laminated, coated. They can all be recycled. It's just who can recycle it. And then I think that's going to grow. The end markets are growing like crazy. they're accepting more and more every day to increase their usage just because of the big benefits out of it. The lower emissions or the less carbon emissions they're using by remelting versus all the virgin materials. They want to grow that too.
Okay, I've got two different directions I want to go here. But the first one, I'm going to hold on to the other one. The comment that you made earlier, Lisa, about the fact that not all of the buildings that we have are seemingly worthy of rehabbing. What do we do about that?
Well, I think it's really important to think about what are the buildings worth preserving, right? And making sure that we're not preserving things that don't actually have the capacity to last as long as we want them to, right? And I think we always have this conversation where in Europe, in a lot of Europe, we have buildings that are very, very old, right? There's like buildings in Italy and Greece that are multiple centuries old, right? That are being repurposed, and they are being repurposed every 100 years or something like that. And then in the Netherlands, you have the approach that after 30 years, they flatten all cities and completely rebuild, which leads to really interesting architecture, and it leads to change, right? And I think here we should think about what are the buildings that are substantially of quality, where we feel both architecturally and perhaps in terms of the way that they are built, they are worth preserving, and where should we rather take the Dutch approach and take stuff away and then build in a much better quality for a longer lifespan.
Yeah. So the virtuous upcycling, I guess, in that case.
But as a result, they have a very interesting incentive. Do you want to talk about it? The incentives of making new glass and taking it back.
Yeah, of course. And I think that is a very good point. But we can all learn from that. And the Dutch have this fantastic program where they take old glass out of buildings, open IGUs, and it's typically annealed, so it's easy to do. They open these IGUs, combine the old panels with a new newly coated glass so that it becomes a very highly performative IGU again. And it's an incentive that's very much driven by the developers themselves, who see a value in people paying more for their apartments if they know it's a kind of sustainable or more sustainable effort, which I think is great. It hasn't translated very well to other places. I think the UK have the approach where you can build more if you take old material out of a building. You're allowed to build taller. In France, it's really all about, paying a fine.
We guilt trip you.
Or being shamed on a public website if you're not good enough. That's enough. For the Germans, it's just fundamentally very difficult. So we see all these kind of different developments in different places. And I think here we could do a lot with incentives that make it economically interesting for people to reuse and, recycle materials that are around. But I think still be conscious that there's a lot of buildings that might want to be taken down and rebuilt rather than actually refurbished.
But there will be a lot of adaptive reuse and refurbishment in the next few decades. It just has to be, because there's so much building that needs to be done. I was going to go, and I don't want to mess up the flow here, but I was going to go back to the recycling question. Actually, so really there's the whole idea of, keeping the buildings and redoing facades, and then making sure that we use all of the material that we may not reuse, the glass from the facades that we are upgrading of some sort. But what's going on in California? We know about Europe. We know about New York. What's happening in California? And how does the supply chain here affect how this, especially the IGUs and the glass recycle?
I think a lot of that would have to be Sophie. And the buildings are still being done just like they're anywhere else. Glass is still being changed out, and it still needs to be recycled. However, I do think the lack of recycling for that type of glass in California is non-existent. We're trying to grow as fast as we can and open new locations around the country. But the West Coast is right now just something where our particular company, Infinite, is not located. Not yet. Hopefully in the next year, we'll have a plant here. So I would say right now, everything that's coming out of these buildings are going to a landfill.
We need you.
Yeah, I know.
And I would say that like we're working with the County of San Diego to develop their circular economy plan. So cities and counties are starting to pay attention to this. They know that we need the infrastructure, that we can't continue to throw stuff into the landfill because we're running out of space. Like we're literally, it's becoming difficult. And it's also a terrible thing to be living next to a landfill where a lot of the space is your construction waste too. So I think we're going to start to see great policy kind of come down from the top-down approach that's incentivizing companies like Patrick's to actually be here in LA. And I think the manufacturers and the audience need to be thinking about that too. There's money coming for this. I think in California in the next 5 years, I think it's going to be a completely different environment.
On the timber front, actually, Palo Alto has this deconstruction ordinance, and so some of the timber that was sent to our campus at SciArc comes from homes in Palo Alto and Santa Barbara with the facilitating of the reuse people. And so in fact, we're sending 4+ truckloads of timber to rebuild a dozen of home in Altadinas by facilitating those connections, of course. So it is existing at small scale. And what we also need to be cognizant about is the value proposition of each of the material. Like it's easier to do residential, to do timber, this kind of things. Don't have the same risk of contamination that has made Patrick's competitor or non-competitor so reluctant to engage in that recycling. And so starting maybe with materials that are a bit easier to handle and reprocess is going to be key.
But I think it's an interesting one, right? Because it always comes back to what are the material properties and uncertainty about what is the material property. And doesn't it mean like that shouldn't be a technical issue, right? We have the means to test materials and we should just get to a point where we can recertify whatever material properties are so that everybody feels comfortable that it can be used again or in a different form.
Yeah, in the world of steel, for instance, there's been the hospital in Boulder, Colorado. Walter Pimore has also done some work in that space. In France, there's lots of recertifying of timber, of not glued timber, but real timber. And that is going on in France. And so that is happening with lesser complex systems. Those glue lamp beams that you were highlighting or...
Yeah, they don't like to do that, which is very normal.
No, solid timber. All timber. Okay.
I mean, is the guy from Boston Terracotta still here?
It's fine.
Oh, I think, we're taking down a building in New York called the Spark Project in New York City. We have a ton of brick from the 1950s. We can't reuse it. We couldn't reuse it on purpose. We sent our brick to Boston Terracotta to see if they could test it and reuse it in their clinker. We couldn't, but now we know. So it's just like you don't need this permission. You can figure out and make these relationships with your manufacturers. Start asking some questions, like if no one wants my brick, it's not the pretty brick that people like to put in the restaurants. Which manufacturers are willing to try something out with me and create something beautiful and cool and innovative and create something new? So I think it's just like trying shit out is important. It's what we got into architecture in the first place is we didn't want to do this. We knew things needed to change, so we can change it.
I'm thinking it's one of the challenges is always that part of our American culture is that everything should be new and that it's going to probably cost just as much to adaptively reuse this thing as it would be to rip it. Probably costs more to do it that way than to rip it down and build something new. I think you sort of hit on one of the solutions to that, which is policy and incentives. But and you guys talked about some of those that are happening in Europe. What do you see as the potential here in the U.S. Besides San Diego?
I mean, I think part of it is changing our clients' mind, and I think we're starting to see it, that clients don't want their buildings to look like the same type of building that everyone else has. It can start in luxury or from higher education institutes that want to have, an identity, branding. They want cities in their buildings to look different than they used to, and I think adaptive reuse is becoming a big part of that. And there's just an amazing, speaking of policy, a huge adaptive reuse bill just got passed in I think it's California, but maybe it was California, that's going to allow us to do a lot more of this office resi conversions. So part of it is changing the client's mind about what adaptive reuse can be, about getting in there earlier and, thinking what could the possibility be. So I think as much as policy, it's...
And finding ways to make it not seem like the more expensive option.
Yeah, make it sexy, make it fun, that's what we're supposed to do.
Make it cheap. Okay, there's some good questions here. Is 3D printing of recycled glass a future possibility? Is that something that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, 3D printing of glass is a thing that can happen. Chikara isn't here, but he probably now, more than 10 years ago, a lot of 3D printing of glass at MIT. We've kind of together tested a lot of that stuff in Delft as a collaboration between MIT and Delft, and that stuff is still going, but it's all about scale. You can do that. You can 3D print objects out of glass. Are we going to print windows tomorrow? Probably not, because we like to use flat glass that is very efficient, cost efficient, and transparent. And with a 3D printing, we're getting to 3D objects, but I think theoretically you can 3D print a wall out of glass if you have a furnace big enough to anneal it afterwards. It's very much possible.
I would look forward to seeing that Apple restaurant doors in recycled 3D printed glass.
We could probably do glass blocks.
Yeah.
I mean, they're coming back, I feel like. We see them a lot in the buildings we're taking down, but I think that would be really cool too. Just listening to you, Lisa, made me think about that.
Make something old new again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of experiments for, the thought of of people humanizing Mars, right? Where you don't actually have a lot of material other than sand. What is the obvious thing to do is kind of to 3D print glass domes out of sand.
Love that. Okay, why do glass float plants, I'm at an odd angle here, I'm having trouble seeing, not want to accept the recycled glass? Is it technical? Is it a business decision? Which is it both or what?
It's not that they don't want to, it's that they're scared to. So these float plants, when they turn a float plant on, they don't turn it off for 20 years. So it runs 24/7 for 20 years or if they have a problem. So to introduce a recycled material outside of their plant, so when they're making this glass, they're only selling 75% of it. Then the rest, when it gets to the end of the line, they break it, scoop it up and take it back and put it back in. So they're using recycled, but it's all internal recycling. So to take the chance on something, let's say from Infinite, if I put it in a rail car and I ship it to them and a bolt falls from the top of the rail car down into that mess, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to a float plant. So they all want to, because they see the big benefits. Their furnaces cook at a much lower temperature, so they get longer life out of their furnaces. They see the CO2 savings. They know that they could purchase cullet much cheaper than they can purchase all the virgin materials and get it to them. So it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they're very scared to. It's a big risk.
Also,
So
how
it
did
takes
you
a lot
overcome
of
that
convince-
risk?
I'm sorry?
How did you overcome that risk? Because you're doing it.
So it takes a long time. We're working on a paper right now, a spec for recycling for float plants. So we are working with each of the float plants to say, okay, how tight is your niche going to be that you will accept? And by that, we'll take all that together and make kind of an average and send it out to all recyclers and say, hey, if you can do this, but it takes a lot of testing. It's like, so we have to send samples over and over and over, I feel like, for 6 months for them to get used to it. See 6 months worth of samples that say, okay, they're clean, consistent. But if you have one bad run in there, then back to square one. So it is very difficult to get in to do it. But they all want to do it. It's just, again, it's tough.
And they all do it in Europe, and the process isn't different. So it's really just about they manage the risk in very much the same way. They each have their requirements of what do we take, and then they typically have their own quality control system. So they get the glass in, and they control themselves. Is what is being delivered safe? Is it a safe batch to bring back into the float, right? So there's no difference. It's just more conservatism here, and I guess less pressure from the industry that makes it a slower process.
That's exactly right. And all of the flow plants here, no matter who they are, nor what is these, some of these names or the big names in here, they're all of their plants over in Europe are doing it. The exact same ones, and they're doing the same process as they are over here. It's just the U.S. plants are too scared to take the risk, and even the contamination levels in Europe. I've worked with, Guardian. I've worked with Saint-Gobain and stuff. I've talked to their plants over there. And they're not even removing all of the PVB. They're like, yeah, leave it in. It's just they're very tight here.
We need a culture shift.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What is the biggest obstacle to wider adoption of reusing or upcycled building materials? Is it that culture piece, or is there more to it?
If buying cheap stuff is a culture,
Yeah. Cheap is good, right?
like buying cheap, and it's not gonna incentivize people to take risks, and because it comes at a cost. And so if you want to go to people that do it cheaper, I think it's cutting a bit of the innovation we could have here, in my opinion.
Which is so weird because there's so much innovation in so many other industries in this country, and particularly in California, right? Why is the building industry so shit?
Chip.
Chip? Yeah.
Well, that seems like the next question. It was, why don't we design buildings to last more than 60 to 100 years rather than adopting a circular economy? I think, I don't think
We got to do both.
Answer.
Yeah, we got to do both. I mean, the buildings that we're taking down in New York, it's a 1950s building. It was designed for almost 100 years, and it's made out of beautiful stuff, like gorgeous stone, brick. We can recycle all this stuff. Yes, there's lead and asbestos. They didn't know that back then. But even here in LA, the LA General Hospital is being converted into housing. Gorgeous stuff. Craftsmanship. I mean, like the care that they took to design a door, and it was like a team of 3 people who then went on to design the Pentagon. Crazy story. But that building, I mean, it's just like the care that was taken, we have to take care too, to Lisa's point again. Like, we have to design with this care, and then it will flow through to our materials, and the manufacturers will also be incentivized to care. So I think it has to be both.
Okay, I'm going to do one last question here that I hopefully will have a little bit of a positive note to end on here. Beyond sustainability and carbon reduction, what are the other core competitive advantages of recycling glass or potentially other facade materials that can be explored and that can maybe help keep people motivated to keep pushing this envelope that what are there some other advantages there for the people who aren't convinced by doing the right thing in sustainable carbon reduction? What's a good advantage to sell them?
Is it for recycling, you're saying? Yeah. Sorry, I was reading some of these and just missed half.
I know there's so many great questions. We just don't have time to answer them all.
So,
Specifically
how to
recycled glass.
incentivize them other than to try to do the right thing? Not, not everybody has a green thumb, or not everybody wants to recycle, or they don't have the time, whatever that may be. So maybe they don't care about the CO2 savings or anything like that. Maybe some incentives are money. We buy most of all the glass out of the buildings to recycle it, just because we know what the end markets are. Just like any company, you get your product in, you do your thing to it, and you turn around and sell it. Glass has a value. It's a very good value. So if you
And it's better than its landfill cost, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you could spend money to landfill it, or you can sell it and make money. There's your incentive, especially if you are a fabricator. And most fabricators, I shouldn't say most, but the majority of ones I know, have like 15% of everything they make has a flaw. So if you make 100 sheets that day, 15 of them are bad. Now, most of these guys are making thousands of sheets a day, so they have thousands of bad sheets of glass. So sell it. There's your incentive. Make some money off of it.
And maybe some container glass people are gonna, buy it for more money and put their whiskey in it, and it's gonna have much more value in its next life.
The container glass, I mean, there's 100 of those people on every corner, collecting the glass bottles. And I believe California is even one of the states that has a rebate for it. Is that right? So yeah, those states, great. People can collect them and stuff like that. But bottled glass is completely different. But it is different than architectural or plate.
we can create a window deposit, like the bottle deposit.
Yeah, we have pitched that in DC with the National Glass Association. We've been to DC a few times, and I can pitch something like that, because that's the only way a lot of this is going to get done. Everyone talks about how much this is being done in Europe and yada yada yada. They're so great over there. They have to do it. That's the law. They have to do it. They don't have a choice. If you can mandate it more here and make it like, hey, this is a government building, they're taking the glass out, has to be recycled. If you have a recycler within an X amount, obviously they're not going to send it from California over to Newark by any means, but if there's a recycler by you, you should have to recycle it. Just starting with that little bit of mandate can go a long way.
All right. Well, you hear it here, and I'm getting the hook. So we're going to have to stop right here and say thank you all for participating in this. This is a great conversation. I wish we could keep it going.
Thank you. Thank you.